Chapter 17. Captivity Day 21. Mari. I can't do this anymore, Sam whimpered, as tears streamed down her face. You're doing fine, Prask insisted. Your technique is solid. You're getting more fluid with swapping from one ability to the next. Your strike accuracy is improving. You're even getting better at anticipating attacks. You only have Kobitanj. You've never been telepathic. It was different before. I could only feel people, not animals. I'm Samsar and now, I can feel their thoughts, their feelings, their terror. Maybe to you they're just animals, monsters even, but to them, I'm the monster. Prask sighed deeply. If you can't put down an animal that's trying to kill you, you will die. They've heard me fighting the others. They've seen their bodies dragged away. They're not trying to kill me anymore, they're trying to escape me. There are just 2 cages left. I tell you what, take down one more and I'll have them send the last one to be incinerated. What? Sam gasped. Why? They were being used as subjects in a research project, Prask said. Yesterday was the final day of the project. They're all scheduled for disposal. What kind of research? Mari said in horror. Colonization is banned on new planets that already have sentient inhabitants. Questionable species are sent for evaluation. None of these qualified, Prask said coldly. Mari looked down at the puddles of blood and bits of gore on the training arena floor. Please tell me this isn't the same research facility where I've been staying. Why? Is it? Yes. Sam collapsed to her knees holding her head in her hands. She tried to scream, but no sound would escape her lips. Not Louis, her mind screamed as her vocal cords seized in her throat. You hear too, a gravely sounding voice spoke fearfully in her mind. They kill us. Next cage you. Sad for us. She'd been talking with him telepathically, night after night. He'd gotten so much better. Thank the powers, she whispered under her breath. What's? Prask began. Louis is in one of those cages, Sam said desperately. He's alive. We need to set him free. They're just animals, Prask objected. Ever since my first day here, I've been communicating with him empathically and telepathically. He's comforted me. He's not just an animal. If that's what the researchers' report says, their report is wrong. So, you're able to connect with an animal using animal telepathy, Prask smirked. It failed when they tested it with normal telepathy. It didn't pass the requirements to be considered sentient. Then they need to revise their stupid requirements. I won't kill him, and I'm not going to let anyone else do it either. How about I pull the tarps off the top of the last 2 cages, Prask said. If you can tell me which one he is. I'll discuss it with Lady Cyanide, and talk to the researchers myself. Just make sure you're right. The researchers warned me these 2 tend to get extremely aggressive. That's why I saved them for last. I wanted to make sure you were ready first. Samsaran are known for having a natural talent for training animals. Even if he technically is one, I'm sure it will be fine, Sam said confidently. Prask motioned for her to stand back, took a firm grip on the tarps, and gave them both a firm yank. Both of the inhabitants rushed to the back of their cages and cowered. He even managed to make Mari nervous. The strength of killing intent flowing through him was unnerving, even if it wasn't directed at her. The inhabitant of the cage on the left had gray-brown skin and a body shape very close to a standard subterran. What set it apart were the small hooked claws on the tips of its fingers, its pointed ears that jutted out like horns from the side of its almost heart-shaped face, and the long unkempt grass-green body hair which only seemed to grow where it would on a male Terran, although it was longer and thicker. Its eyes were black and at an odd angle, and it needed serious dental work. It looked close enough to a Terran to seem familiar, although she'd never seen a creature like it before. The bizarre thing in the right cage was harder to define. It wasn't fully bipedal. It had a partial carapace protecting the top of its head continuing down its back and nearly to the end of its tail, which ended in a bushy fuzzy tip. Its fingers and toes were black, accented by white fur on its hands and feet, which slowly transitioned to orange as it continued up its arms and legs. A dense mane of protofeathers hung over its shoulders, which were light blue near its body and white further away. Black striped orange fur hung below the carapace on its head and long white fur hung below its chin, as if mimicking a beard. The creature's mouth shape, with its long teeth, reminded her of a predatory fish. This sort of lemur kittybug bird was the sort of creature for which the anti-hominid classification existed. It simply made no sense and defied cladistic analysis. Sam had to decide between some sort of hominid and what was best classified as a deific-type anti-hominid. One was Louis, the other was not. They were both too frightened by Prask to give her any indication which was which. "Are that one's eyes glowing green?" she said as she motioned toward the deific creature. "No," Prask said, "it's just the way light is hitting them." "So, which one is it?" The lemur kitty was staring at the green-haired one, which was watching Sam. "Give them some space," Sam demanded. "You're scaring them." "Be careful. Lady Cyanide will skin me if something happens to you," Prask said. "I'm not moving far." "Louis?" Sam thought while trying to watch both of them. Not like me, it sounded like Louis's mind, but which one was it? Not outside, Sam thought, before realizing how much confusion that could cause. The lemurkety thing moved closer to the green-haired creature. The Terran-like animal leaned away from the deific creature and held its clawed hands close to its body. "Stop," Sam thought urgently. "I said wrong. Not in cage. Outside." "Of course, it's the one that looks like it fell into a genetic blender," Samari said to Prask. "Still want to save it?" Prask chuckled. Sam nodded. "Okay," Prask sighed, "I'll let them know you want to keep subject L001 as a pet." L001? Really? Sam snickered. And they thought he wasn't smart. He must have tried to read his tag when I asked him his name. "You need to keep it on a collar and chain until it's trained," Prask said. "I don't care how smart you think it is. It needs to be housebroken and be taught how to behave around people." "Like a Terran child?" Sam teased. "You leash train kids?" "Try and make it. I mean him, understand the situation. I have to get in touch with Lady Cyanide before she leaves." "What?" Sam said with mild annoyance. "I'm always hunting her down. Why doesn't she ever warn me she won't be around?" "It's her business, not yours," Prask scolded. "This is just a diplomatic formality. The Tsarina wanted to make a big display of returning those wings. The ceremony's been on her schedule for a while." "Can I go?" "Why?" "I remember flying with her. I was kinda the one that opened the box. I want to see it return to its rightful owners." "I'll mention it," Prask shrugged. "You'll have to discuss it with her." Kali. It hadn't taken long for Ojeran to talk to Lilac. Using her elemental abilities to extract the vehicles from the street took only a few minutes. The passengers of the half-tracks were taken into custody and carted off. A new standard day began before it was all done, although on the local planet, the sun was just starting to set. Much to his credit, Ojeran convinced Lilac to permit him to bring Edarxi to a juice bar as an apology for the fiasco with Ruka. He seemed determined to call her that instead of Kali, but she liked the way it sounded, so didn't protest. Lilac only agreed under the condition that she select the location and accompanied the two of them. Kali wasn't happy about it, and suspected it wasn't chosen for the ambience, but for camera coverage and the ease of concealing a mic under the table before they arrived. An opinion that was only bolstered by the roundabout route Lilac directed them to follow to get there. It was the same outdoor air juice bar Kali and Lilac had stopped at the day they arrived. Lilac, could you do me a favor? Remember those candies you got me when I first got here? Didn't we get them at the chocolate store over there? Would you mind getting me a few? Kali asked with feigned embarrassment. Which kind? Lilac asked. Kali formed a circle with her lips. I'll pick up some later, Lilac said. Please, Kali said, I don't want to forget. Lilac grudgingly agreed. Once she'd entered the store, Kali directed Ogeron's attention under the table and pointed out the microphone her tail had located on the underside. What kind of chocolates did you send her for? Ogeron asked. Dirty Squirty or something like that. They're cream-filled suckers. I just wanted a little alone time to finish drying my tail without her getting weird about it. Kali held up the end of her brown tails and swirled a current of warm air around them. When did that get wet? He asked. When you left me alone in the car, Kali smirked. I'm calmer now, just drop it. She had just finished drying her tails, but he was still chuckling when Lilac returned to the table. Did I miss a good joke? Lilac asked as she took her seat. I think she may have lore-based truth detection, Kali thought to Ogeron. He looked at Kali and raised his neck slightly while keeping his head still. She was just telling me about the candy, Ogeron said. They have 2 varieties, Lilac said with a smile. I decided I should get both, considering what classes you said she seemed interested in. Kali flushed. That was thoughtful, Ogeron said. I'm sure her Tejmare will appreciate it. Lilac's posture stiffened slightly as he said Tejmare. The woman had told Kali that she was asexual, but her response told a different story. Today was a lot of fun, Kali said with more enthusiasm than she felt. Is service always like that? I'm glad you enjoyed it, Ogeron said while watching Kali's eyes, which were darting back and forth between him and Lilac. I'm sorry you won't be able to take any of those courses. That wasn't what she was thinking, but she could work with it. Kali pouted to Lilac. I think we may be able to arrange something, Lilac said with a faint twinkle in the corner of her eyes. Kali reached under the table with her black and right tails, and gently caressed his tail. He smiled. Will you accept a link? She thought to him. There are 2 telepaths nearby. I want to isolate our thoughts. That's fine, he said while looking down at her tails, so Lilac wouldn't suspect he was answering an unrelated question. The link was formed instantaneously. He'd clearly done this before. She told me she's asexual, Kali thought through the link. She got weird when you mentioned my partner, and was quick offering to let me attend classes. What's going on? He typed something on his tablet, then put it away. She lied, he thought through the link. She's Dodgemare and a dominant. It's in her military file. Take a swing at me with your other tail and miss. See for yourself. I may need some cover, Kali thought over the link. Kali wasn't surprised they'd include that sort of thing in official records, not in this empire. Master, I can't see what they're doing down there, Kali said nervously. Tell me if they start moving up too high. I will, Ogeron said calmly. You said you don't have full control over them, but how much feeling do you actually have in them? Not much in the length, most of the nerves are in the tip. Good to know, he smiled. I saw a club where people all wear masks, Kali blushed. Someone recommended it to me. If I do get the chance to go on service with you again, would it be okay if I checked it out? At minimal urging, her left tail swung wide toward his tail, catching Lilac by the ankle, keeping the tip of her tail beyond the other woman's leg. Once it was in place, Kali ignored her tails as they wondered of their own volition. Probably not. That one is just outside the patrol route, he said firmly, while glancing swiftly at the change in Lilac's expression. Oh, so it would have to be without you, Kali pouted. Maybe for a little while, Ojeran moved his head forward on his neck. As long as you're behaving. That's such a strange Terran expression, he thought over the link. Bad behavior is still behavior. Kali giggled. He glanced at Lilac in confusion momentarily before returning his attention to the conversation. I had a couple questions earlier, but I'm questioning the wisdom of asking right now. It may be better to leave things as they are. Kali looked over at Lilac, wondering what had distracted him. She was wide-eyed, and her mouth was hanging open. Where is my tail? Kali thought in a panic. They're just massaging my tail, he thought back. They're fine. No, the other tail. It's your tail, how should I know? He scoffed mentally. I've been trying to ignore it. You really should apologize and offer to make it stop, he thought. Kali looked down under the table. Her left tail had coiled its way up Lilac's right leg. It was slowly coursing up and down from her ankle to her mid-thigh, underneath her clothing, with the tip hanging down limply. From the look on her face, she was enjoying the feel of Kali's soft fur. I'm so sorry, Lilac, Kali said apologetically. I didn't realize it was doing that. You should have said something. I'll make it stop. Lilac leaned forward and hissed, don't you fucking dare. Kali held up both hands, leaned back and said, okay, sorry, I'll go back to ignoring it. Ojeran called over a waitress to refill their drinks. Since she's preoccupied, Kali giggled while tapping on the table to remind him of the mic. What were the questions? He nodded then asked, when you said I'm not making it easy for you. What were you talking about? The conversation we had before going on patrol. Kali pushed down on the nose of her mask to make sure he couldn't see her blushing. I'm attracted to personality traits. If you want me to stop being attracted to you. I don't remember saying that, he scolded. There's a difference between being attracted and acting on attraction. Kali smirked. Adyarchie, he said softly, I've just never been attracted to a subterran before. I know you said you're not one, but with exception of the tails. People are attracted to who they're attracted to. Her mind latched onto a single word, before, she thought then remembered she was still in a mental link and stopped the thought there. They both looked over as Lilac made an odd squeak as her head rolled back. I should probably stop that before my tail makes it someplace that's actually interesting. Lilac lowered her head and glared at her. Where is it now? Ojeran asked. The end is just slapping against her inner thighs, Kali shrugged. He chuckled. Poor spanking-deprived thing. That's enough of that, Kali said as she reached down to grab her tail. Please don't, Lilac pled. Only if you agree to our terms, Kali said with a vicious grin. What terms? She panted. Kali turned to Ojeran and shrugged. Master, you decide. Didn't think that through, he asked over the link. I don't know what we can get away with, Kali thought back. Have my name added to the approved visitor list, and agree to make me her official escort to classes, or to bring her on an occasional service patrol. Okay, Lilac said as tears welled up in her eyes. We'll work out the details later. Kali went back ignoring her tail as it started slapping her a little harder. Can we do service duty someplace with less sex next time? Kali thought over the link. I mean, if you're not at all attracted to me, risking getting me worked up isn't. Adyarchie, he thought, forcefully interrupting her. She hung her head. Sometimes familiarity with a person leads to you considering things you normally wouldn't, he thought over the link. If my body starts responding to you in that way, I won't stop it. Don't push it. Kali grinned playfully and thought, isn't that when I'm supposed to push? Ojeran smirked. He took out his tablet and thumbed through it. Kali scowled. The tip of her tail was getting damp. She took off her mask and laid it on the table, grabbed onto the goodie bag Lilac had brought her, and rummaged through it. There were twice as many candies modeled after female than male parts. It could be size-related, but Kali doubted that was the case. Ojeran placed his tablet on the table, slid it across the table to Kali, sat back, and folded his arms across his chest. The screen was displaying a conversation between him and Azuri, which had started after he'd forwarded her the image of Kali standing with her sons. Azuri had said they looked like a nice family and said she could tell the boys loved their mother. It warmed Kali's heart to read those words from someone better than her at interpreting expressions on reptilian faces. Keep reading, he thought over the link as she started pushing back the tablet. It quickly became clear that he had deep-seated issues with Terran women in general. Between misshapen sex toys and the way he'd been treated the one time he had tried it, he was unwilling to consider it again. The one Terran he had attempted it with had apparently used him to pleasure themselves, and had no interest in him beyond that. Azuri kept pointing out that he'd said Adirxi was clearly curious about him and his culture. Azuri kept scolding him for rejecting someone that seemed to be offering him friendship. Another common refrain from Azuri was pushing him to ask her where she learned the reptilian dialect. Kali motioned him over. Sit me. I tell, she said in the reptilian dialect. He scooted his chair closer, opened up the text interface and entered. Adirxi source, then sat back and watched her type. 4-year Midguard Valkren Gen O. I live learn much believed was of them that time. Kali sent the message, sat back, and smiled. I was in a stasis chamber for around 40,000 years, Kali thought over the link. I've met Dvorjan. Ojeran blinked in disbelief. Kali nodded. Lilac covered her mouth to muffle a moan. Once she'd composed herself, Lilac said, I should get her back into confinement. Typical Terran, he thought angrily over the link. Can Ojeran stay over? Kali asked as she withdrew her tails and shook her left tail while trying to hide her disgust. If she adds me to the approval list. Ojeran said pointedly. We'll get her situated, then I can take you back and have your name added, Lilac said. That way I won't get sidetracked or forget. On your way back, pick up a tent or something so we can have a place to hide from the cameras, Kali thought, then severed the link. Ojeran and Kali smiled at each other. After being returned to the confinement area, Kali got a bite to eat then sat on the side of the tub and washed her tails properly. The way she dealt with Lilac. It may have served her purposes, but it left her with a strong feeling of revulsion. She talked about concepts of dominance and submission with Sin Tholo, and had looked into it further after her arrival. Lilac had grown up in the Kailani Dominion, but seemed to have a poorer understanding than she did. She'd listed herself as dominant in her military papers, but someone who was actually dominant was supposed to prioritize the needs of those who are willing to submit. Lilac was a validation-seeking, egocentric zealot, not fitting cleanly into either role. If Lilac ever asked her to do something like that again, Kali would make sure to hit her hard enough that she could get some enjoyment out of it for herself, which would likely cripple the frail little Zil. Hopefully, Ojeran wouldn't take too long. If someone like Roka, with authorization to have the shield lowered, was serious about attempting to kill her, it wouldn't be that difficult, as long as the suppression field was active. Kali knew exactly how she'd do it. Couple that with how close she felt to losing control earlier, she was going to disable that runic ring one way or another. With a tent or something similar, she would be able to re-enable it without anyone knowing it had been inactive. Something about the design of the building prevented sending messages using normal communicators. The ones supplied to the security staff seemed to work, but they must function differently. Kali turned off the faucet and began wringing the water out of her tails. Without being able to manipulate the airflow, it was an arduous procedure. She glanced over at the outlet the inactive video screen plugged into. There weren't any free sockets. I should ask them to unplug the stupid tree hologram and bring me a hairdryer, Kali complained loud enough that any microphones in the area should be able to hear. She didn't expect much from the regular staff, but if Jax wanted to give her a reason to feel like showing some appreciation, it would be better than sending out StalkerBot 9000 again. Kali paused momentarily, wondering where that tradition came from. She'd never heard of an actual device called something or other 9000, but some derogatory name followed by that specific number were just a normal part of daily derision. She shrugged it off and returned her attention to drying her fur. Drop shield, someone said. Kali dropped her tails and spun around, ready to sprint. Oh, hello, Shugek, Kali said as he stepped forward and had the force field raised behind him. There was a request to have something delivered to your living area, he said. Prior to being submitted for final approval, I've been instructed to. Is it a hairdryer? Kali said excitedly. A what? Shugek asked in confusion. No. Did you want one? Not if it means I'll have to forfeit whatever was requested. Do you know what was requested? He asked. No, Kali giggled, but it has to be more interesting than a hairdryer. Infinitely less useful, maybe. Not knowing what it is makes it interesting. He took out an oversized tablet. I'll make myself a note about the dryer. I need you to take a look at something, and tell me everything you can about it. A little vague, Kali shrugged and held out her hand. I'm in a great mood, so no game today. Just let me see it. There are 3 video files on there. Start with the first one, and tell me what you see. She refocused her eyes to make sure she wouldn't be thrown off by the power flowing through the device over the course of normal operation and took hold of it. Is the first on the left, or right? Kali asked. They're numbered, he said. The video looked like it had been taken by some sort of orbital device, which was zooming in closer and closer to the surface of some planet she'd never seen before. It's an unpopulated city, she shrugged. Is this on Lauhost or something? Are you trying to make me feel bad about a war they caused? Wrong planet, keep looking, he said. What she had thought were char marks on the sides of building were slowly moving. The structures were undamaged underneath. Do you know what's causing that? Kali asked. Storms, something in orbit maybe. It's not uniform enough to be an eclipse. What is it? We were hoping you could tell us, Shugek grumbled. Open the next video, Kali smirked. Please open the next video, he reiterated. Better, Kali said as she closed the first video and opened the second. The first part of the second video was from a planetary surveillance device similar to the first. There was a timer in the top corner, counting up as it watched a shuttle coming in for a landing. The shadows on the surface didn't respond to the vessel coming in for a landing, but the numbers changed color about a quarter of the way through. It looks like a normal shuttle landing to me, Kali shrugged. The last video starts from when we changed the counter to red on that video. Okay, Kali grumbled. This is really boring, but okay, I'll open it. Can you at least tell me what planet this is? I've been instructed not to, Shugek said in an almost apologetic tone. What I can tell you is that at no point was any form of landing assistance active. Kali opened the last file. This video was from a camera on board the shuttle. The timer was on the top right of the screen. There was a strike team seated inside wearing sturdy armor consisting of a glossy white alloy. The chamber was bathed in light along the floors and the ceiling. It was as if there had been a deliberate attempt to keep shadows from gathering. Kali suspected she knew what was going to happen. They clearly had suspicions of what they were dealing with, but they were looking at it all wrong. There were still shadows inside their suits, just beyond the reflective surface of their helmets. A darkling could not be stopped by walls or force fields. Shadows exist at the border between the light and the blackness. They would have been safer in a place devoid of light, at least until enough light was introduced, providing a border through which they could pass. A faint shadow beneath the pilot's seat darkened first. A minor twitch in his shoulders, looking like little more than a muscle spasm, was the first sign something had gone wrong. An instant later, blood started flowing out of the seams in the armor of one soldier after the next. Chaos erupted within the cabin, helmets being torn off, lasers being fired, high-power flashlights being shined into any gaps they could find. The soldiers were being consumed within the very suits intended to protect them. The entire time, the pilot calmly continued flying to the surface. Kali stared and gaped. It was terrifying to watch the carnage while thinking that one of these creatures had ridden on the nape of her neck for days on end. After the shuttle landed, the Darklings had no further need to hold the corpses together with solidified shadows, and let them collapse into piles of mush as they left for shadows unseen. "Can you tell me what that was?" Shugak asked. "It's not real," Kali replied in awe of the ferocity of the shadow entities. "Truth," a voice said somewhere to the right. Kali turned her head. A telepath had been cloaking themselves just outside of the force field. "Thank you for being honest," Shugak said with a slight bow as he took back the tablet. "I'm sorry I put you through this for nothing. I'll let my superiors know." As her visitors left, Kali barely managed to keep a straight face. She was glad when she'd asked her dark companion their name, their reply had been not real. Once the door was closed, Kali walked over and sat on her couch, still thinking about that last video. The pilot was killed first, and his body was being manipulated from then onward. There was a brief lag time between when the solders began bleeding. The pattern seemed to be squirt, squirt, pause. This implied the shuttle had only been attacked by 3 Darklings, including the one controlling the pilot. She wondered what planet that was, why there was a colony of Darklings there, and if not real was with them. Section break. Kali yawned and stretched. She'd dozed off on the couch. A noise had woken her. She was exhausted after her first day out in weeks. She opened one eye just a crack. There was quite a bit of movement. She laid there, watching through her eyelashes, hoping nobody would realize she was awake and watching. They were assembling something within the border of her confinement area. Whatever it was, it must have been her delivery. Kali watched as it slowly took shape. It was round, but definitely not the tent she'd asked for. They must have gotten fed up with her pillow mound. It was a round bed framed by 5 vertical posts. She watched as they assembled a metal loop which was connected to the top of the posts. The mattress had a surprisingly broad radius. It would be an ideal place to relax with extra company. Kali couldn't help but wonder what inspired this as the workers slid a sheer canopy into place. It was just dark enough to make her feel hidden in the evening. They seemed determined to make her think she had privacy, but she knew better. The cameras had detected her short visitor. They'd still be able to see her well enough using thermal settings. Most of the workers were either Cayman or Sub-Terran. She hadn't seen Ogeron since opening her eye. Then again, she didn't recognize any of the workers. Her tails were lazily moving around her, ready to act if needed, but she didn't feel like moving any more than she had to. The bottom of the bed frame was only a few inches off the floor. If this was from anyone other than Ogeron, they were in for a world of hurt. It was understandable if he wanted to give room for their tails. There was no other good reason to provide her with a bed large enough for 3 or 4 people. Kali watched as they carted away the packing materials and tossed 3 pillows onto the mattress. 2 normal-sized, and 1 long-body pillow. She caught herself smiling as she saw Ogeron walk out from somewhere behind her and walk over to thank the workers. She tried to hide her smile before he turned to look in her direction. She wanted to just lay there and pretend to be asleep, but if he tried lifting her, he'd probably hurt himself. Ferrocines may be stronger than Terrans, but Kali was deceptively heavy. If her nags were active, she could offset her weight telekinetically. She could use her tails to achieve the same effect, but it would be obvious. He may be willing to play along. He did say he enjoyed being called to assist at the role-play club. If his primary issue with Terran women was selfishness and lack of reciprocation, encouraging him to see her as an exception sounded like an enjoyable challenge, but not tonight. After mentioning the Valkyren Gen-O and Johnny, she was sure they'd have plenty to talk about while cuddling. His scales were so smooth, and he was cushier than she first expected. Ojeran walked over and knelt in front of her, looking down at her face. "Elder tongue tonight," he said. "It's our strongest shared tongue. How long are you going to pretend to be sleeping at Yarxi?" Kali pouted. "I was hoping you were planning to toss me into bed," Kali smiled. "Okay, I'll get up." "I remember your words," he said. "We have blanket to make cameras believe a thing happen." "Careful, if we pretend for the cameras your body might respond," Kali teased. "What did I say about that?" he said as he stood up and walked to the bed, and started undressing. Kali bit her lower lip. "You won't stop it." "I'll be right there." Ojeran sat on the end of the bed and pulled the blanket up. Kali knelt next to him on both knees, wrapped her arms around him with her mouth next to where his ears were and whispered, "I need you to do something for me. Just hold on to me while I explain." He placed one hand on her knee and the other on the small of her back. "I almost lost control of my abilities earlier," Kali whispered. "I'm sure you can imagine how dangerous that can be. I need to disable the knack suppression field so I'll be used to keeping it under control myself. I know how. I just need a distraction while I mess with the floor. Will you help?" He lowered his head, rubbing it against her cheek and softly asked, "What do you need me to do?" "I'm going to hang my arms and tails over the side of the bed so I can reach the floor. Just toss the blanket over us and act like you're having sex with me from behind. I need an excuse to hang over the side for long enough to disconnect the field." "It does not sound hard for me," he said quietly. "Hopefully not this time," Kali giggled softly. It took longer than she had hoped, but she managed. She got under the stone floor tile and slid the narrow wedge of Mistruim back just far enough to break the circuit. Hopefully, the grunting from the exertion of moving the pieces of the floor would convince any observers they were doing just what it looked like. It was nice to have access to her knacks without anyone being any the wiser. "It's done," Kali thought to him. Ojeran pretended to be climaxing. Kali pushed up off the floor against him and did the same while trying not to overact. After they appeared to be done, Kali pulled away from him. He laid down on his back. She cuddled up next to him and pulled the blanket over the two of them with her tails. "Thanks, I needed that," Kali giggled as he stifled a laugh. "All that grinding and nothing," Kali whispered with a hint of sorrow. He reached over, took her hand, and rested against his abdomen. In a hushed tone, he said, "You were here." "Well, that makes me feel better," she grinned. "You're way down. Here." She lightly patted the seam where his tail connected to the rest of his body, then rolled on her side with her leg across his stomach. When aroused, the seam would start to part, and his penises would slide through, one on each side of his pelvis. When they spent the night examining each other, he'd shown them to her. She'd expected them to be scaly. They weren't, but they did narrow to the tip, in an almost horn-like shape. She had no idea how it would feel, but couldn't help but wonder. "Adyarxi," he hissed. "Is my leg too heavy?" she asked. "Tails." "Sorry," she said, as she grabbed onto her twin tails and yanked them away from him. "Your tails keep doing that." "I will buy scale polish," he grumbled. "Is that a thing?" Kali asked. "I wouldn't mind helping." "No," he laughed. "Nice offer but bad for fur, maybe." I appreciate the bed, Kali grumbled, but this may not work. My tails like to wander. Ferrocene tails are not so flexible, he sounded frustrated. If your tail's not so. Despite trying to interact with him on even footing without using her telepathy, she could tell he was feeling guilty for enjoying the feel of her tails. My first night with my Tejmare, she bound my tails with a ribbon and Kali asked, would that help? I think maybe, he said. Okay, I'll take off my sarong, and you can tie them with that until we can get something better, Kali said. Is that okay? Tell me, why is this something you want, he asked. I'm just offering to make you more comfortable, Kali said as she sat up and started untying her sarong. Flirt, I understand. Selfish people, I understand. I want to understand why you want with me. I was stuck in a broken stasis pod for a long time. I could feel other people living their lives, but couldn't have a life of my own. I missed so much. I want to experience as much as I can. I was really just getting started when they stuck me in here. That's why I want to try new things. Why you, in specific, is a different matter. Kali turned to face him while she struggled to tie up her tails. You have a lot of personality traits I find attractive. The fact you're nice to me and convenient helps too. He leaned forward, took the fabric from her, and helped free her tails from the poorly knotted sarong. Are you sure? She asked. Ojeran nodded. There are some things I'd like to try, Kali said softly. I feel I can trust you and think we can be good friends. I hope I'm not wrong. If I tried something and didn't like it, I think you're the kind of person who would be understanding. I think you'd still be willing to be my friend. If I'm wrong, please tell me. If you didn't like something, I'd want to know. I can't promise they won't try to start something, Kali said as she grabbed onto her tails as they darted toward him again. Let them free. Long day of stress, he said. Kali nodded. If you're sure. I understand your reasons now, he said confidently. Yes. I am. Kali held her brown tails and shook them. They're probably going to go after your tail as soon as I let go of them. Stinger tail does not act like this, why? He asked. When I consumed a changeling mutation core, some things moved. What used to be my uterus works like a venom sac, but I have to fill it myself. Just above that is another part that moved. She looked down between her legs and smiled wearily. My Tejmare found it. Like I said earlier, it's not easy to get to. You can do this, he asked. Oh. Yeah, Kali smiled playfully. Who knows, one of these days I may show you how. Standard time, it is early morning. My tomorrow begins in 6 hours. I have much to do. I will run with you, but may be late. Too much paperwork. We sleep tonight. Talk more another.